I'm delighted to have such, I normally say eminent group, but on this occasion I will say amusing group of panelists. And our professional comedian, Imran Yusuf, arrived about 20 seconds ago, just to keep the rest of us on our toes, and we were all practicing what jokes we might be able to share with you. But on a serious note, I'd particularly like to thank Lena, who has orchestrated this collection and is doing some fascinating research in her own right on the role of religion, belief and humour. I'd also like to introduce you to Phil Champain, who is director of the Faith and Belief Forum. Phil has undertaken some really important work on areas to do with conflict resolution, and you'll be hearing more from him in a moment. Andrew Graystone, writer and broadcaster, whose latest book you can see behind you, Faith, Hope and Mischief, and we're hoping for a little bit of mischief from Andrew. And Imran Yusuf, our raconteur, our stand-up comedian, and some of you may recognize Imran because, of course, he came to the Woolf Institute in the pre-COVID days where we could actually have physical webinars, did a physical seminars, wonderful seminar with Ashley Blaker, and I think we're going to see a clip of that, and we look forward to not only being amused by Imran, but actually challenging him and being challenged by him about the role of humour. So with no further ado, because there's so much to cover in the next hour or so, I'm going to ask Lena to give us the first of two clips before we begin this conversation. Lena, over to you.
Can you see me? Yes. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. So I'm showing you two clips on basically that illustrate a little bit the role of comedy and humor in interfaith. So here's one. Can you see it? Excellent.
We are Three Stooges fans, actually. In fact, we are the very incarnation of their famous line, "We tried to think, but nothing happened."
10 years ago, when we began working together, we did what many interfaith groups do. We shared with each other from the wisdom of our spiritual traditions.
Let's
try again. That's how it was for the first 3 years.
So that's one. And then without further ado, I'll move to the US. So these are two, again, very short clips by, again, an interfaith comedy.
December of 2001, I had hired a publicist, and the job of a publicist is to raise a performer's visibility. She was not particularly effective. She basically got me into the witness protection program. But she called me in December. She said, "I got this great idea. Why don't you do a show with a Muslim comedian?" And I said, "Do you have any other ideas?" And she persevered against my wishes, but she found a guy in California. We swapped videotapes. It was way back then. Liked what we saw and began doing shows together. And at one point we said, wouldn't it be cool if we had a Christian comedian to join us? But we couldn't find any Christian comedians.
We've been working together. I met Bob when I was in seminary. I was trying to write a thesis on humor and religion, and no one out there thought that made any sense. I found Bob doing a search on the internet. He was doing a show in New Jersey. I literally just showed up and introduced myself. The next thing you know, I'm opening for him, and the rest is kind of the story of our long relationship in comedy. And I just want to say, Bob, I totally agree with what you said. This is a ministry. It totally is. And I think it's one of the more important pieces of what I do as a minister as well. And here's two reasons why I love this show. One is that when we laugh together, our worlds overlap for a split second, and we see what we have in common. And we see we have way more in common than we think. And the second part that I love about this show is that it's respectful comedy. So much we see about comedy is tearing down, building walls. This builds bridges.
And then one more. As part of the
It's been great. I get to go to these various places all across America, meet different groups of people, with one positive cause, for, putting people together, making people laugh, building bridges, as Susan mentioned. And it's great. We all have different vibes on stage. We all have different personalities, different styles, and it's amazing, and everyone's a different flavor. Like as far as audiences, they may respond to one more than the other, or one more than the other. And like Bob was saying, a lady at a show said that for an hour and a half she forgot she was sick. In my case, she remembered she was sick. So we all got different vibes, and it's great to be a part of this.
Okay, I'm done with the clips.
Good, thank you very much, Lena. So interesting themes coming out of there: the building of bridges, humour as a ministry. I'd like to start with Phil, and in terms of the use of comedy in your work, Phil, in interfaith work. How, why not, and how do you, if at all, use comedy in what you do at the Faith and Belief Forum?
Thanks, Ed, and really great to see those clips to begin with. It sort of reminds you how kind of humour can make you feel good, and smiling and laughter is really good for the soul, and I think it's part of who we are. And I suppose, the Faith and Belief Forum, I suppose we kind of see it as part of who people are. We have a very kind of individual approach to exploring faith and belief, and I think for all of us, and certainly I'm a believer that humour is part of who we are, and therefore is important to think about it. I suppose the role of it, I'm thinking we had, you sort of asked why do we kind of value it. I suppose it's a good question to ask. It's maybe not a question we've had much cause to kind of consider for particularly specifically, but we did invite Omid Jalili to our last gala dinner, and Omid Jalili, as you know, is a well-renowned comedian. He's been in The Mummy and Iranian-born. He's a Baha'i, very funny guy. And we invited him to that event, I think for two reasons, if I reflect on why. I think one is because we wanted people to feel relaxed. And I think humour can help people feel relaxed. It sort of grounds people in the realities and absurdities of life that we all share. And in the clips there, I think somebody mentioned, it crosses over our differences in a way, because we all are part of this absurd world that we live in, and we share these absurdities. And so it helps people relax and laugh. But I think there's another reason why we invited Omid and a comedian to that event, which is I think we also wanted to shine a light on the work we do. And I think comedy or humour also has a role in shining a light on the realities. And sometimes those realities can be difficult to confront sometimes. And I think humour can be a way of shining a light on those things that we want to talk about but maybe can't, and or can't so easily. So I think it was for those two reasons really, and I suppose in our work that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to, one, create spaces where people can feel relaxed, and relaxed enough to feel safe to sort of explore issues. And secondly, we also want those kind of difficult issues to be brought into the room. And I think humour can help to do that. There's something that a comedian said, a kind of American comedian, Stephen Colbert, which I'm not quite sure if I agree with, but he did say that he defies, if you're laughing, he says, I defy you to be afraid. And I think I like that phrase, because I think it talks to this need to sort of feel safe enough, feel relaxed enough to talk about what are sometimes difficult issues. The reason not sure if I agree with it totally, is that I think it's the kind of the way in which you use humor, which is also important. And I think sometimes if we use humor in the wrong way, it can be laughing at somebody rather than with somebody. And that can be sort of undermine that feeling of feeling safe. So
well, let me come in there, Phil. It's a perfect, thank you for that. It's a perfect segue into Andrew's work, I think, in terms of laughing at people, laughing with people. And whilst I wonder whether, Andrew, you can respond to that. And before you do, Imran, there's another opportunity there. Fundraising dinners, Imran, there's a new audience for you. But Andrew, laughing with, laughing at, punching up, punching down, help us here.
Yeah, I resonate with what Phil says about laughing being a kind of lowest common denominator. All human beings laugh. There isn't a human being who isn't ticklish. You just have to find the right spot. So it's something that we have absolutely in common. The very nature of religion is that we're all equal in our shared humanity, but we're equal in the face of something much bigger, much greater than us. And so there's a responsibility. You can use humor to prick the bubbles of the overmighty, especially the overmighty as yourself. But there's a responsibility to use it wisely, I think, to prick the bubbles of people who are too powerful, not to gang up on people who are powerless. So if a cartoonist draws a picture of a politician with their trousers down, we find that kind of funny because it takes them down, brings them down to our level. But if a group of kids gang up in the playground to point fingers and laugh at a funny looking kid, and I'm talking from bitter experience here, that's not cool, because that's using the power of laughter against somebody. And I think we probably share that in common. It's something that we can do together and share rather than use against each other.
Let me push back on one thing you said, Andrew, because I think we'd all agree about the sense of equality and humanity. But of course, what I think is funny about your humiliation, you won't think is funny. So to help us, where does that shift come from?
I do think it's about power. It's about leveling down for people. There's a story in my book about, I do quite a lot of community activism work, and there's a story about working with a community where our local council had threatened to close the library down, and we campaigned around keeping this library open. And the denouement of our campaign was one morning we all showed up at the library, all the members of the community showed up at the library on the same day, and we'd all got our library tickets, and we went in to the library and we borrowed all the books all at once. It was going out yard by yard. I went and got 10 Jackie Collins because they were nice and good and thick, a couple of feet of books on one ticket. Now, the essence of that was, it was a fun thing to do. The council were humiliated because they were doing the wrong thing in closing the library, but they couldn't really object because we were only doing what you're supposed to do with a library, which is borrowing the books. We just borrowed them all at once. And that, I think, is an example of using humour in uniting a community together against an overmighty body, in this case, Stockport Council.
Well, I'm glad to hear Stockport Council were humiliated in such a way. And I think that's a wonderful way into the next clips that we're going to have from Lena before we invite Imran onto the stage.
Okay, so I'm going to show two clips from the comedy duo Ashley Blaker and Imran Yusuf, they did profit sharing. So that's number one.
Talking about dating, what's with the virgins? The 72 virgins.
All right, yeah. So you've all heard the 72 virgins thing.
No, we've all heard the 72 virgins.
I think the Sun newspaper made it up. Like just to wind it. We never heard of it until like they go, oh, you know, Muslims believe in 72 virgins. Like, no, where is this? No, it's written nowhere in the Quran. I think it's just come out of like some oral tradition that's not been authenticated. Yeah, if this happens, then Muslims get 72 virgins. So we don't actually believe in it, but enough people have kind of come to assume that it's true because of the tabloids for some weird reason. Like I've never heard that. I'm told if you kill yourself and everybody else in the process, you get rewarded by an
73, but just one too many. You should not set one 72-year-old virgin.
Probably deter a lot of guys. The Sun should have said that. Yeah, they should have done that.
You ever been in love?
Okay, and the next one.
There's a few guys in here will be sleeping on the sofa tonight.
Unfortunately, their initials are big. You should not indulge in ethnic tropes.
The show's finished then.
How extreme is your mosque?
Well, we've got Wi-Fi. And, you know, I saw a woman in there the other day.
Yeah, but that was the clean.
I think that the whole extremism in mosques, I think Finchley Park probably gave like a bad reputation for to other mosques because of you know, the stuff that kind of Abu Hamza was saying. But what you don't understand about Abu Hamza is that he did a lot of panto, right? And we tend to overlook how much he gave to those kids.
Do you ever get recognised in your mosque?
Not really, but if somebody does, I'm like, I remind them, if you're in a house of worship, there are no celebrities. You're there to pray, whatever. So, you know, to focus on that.
You're not getting down on the mat with you to take a selfie.
Maybe somebody's already tried. I don't know.
I was going to do a joke about photo bombing, then I thought better of it. Have you ever been to a synagogue?
Yeah, I've been here, the Reform Synagogue.
Yeah, that doesn't count. Oh, I have to get half the room day. You need to come to my synagogue. My synagogue is extreme. It really is extreme.
How?
Like you might be looking at me and thinking I'm Orthodox. You come to my synagogue, you'd realise I'm nothing of the sort. Because compared to the other men who go there, I'm basically a Gentile. I mean, these guys won't even come and see me perform unless men and women are sat separate. At least that's the excuse they give me. They probably go and see John Bishop, no problem at all. They just don't want to see me. But you need to meet my rabbi as well, because he's quite a character.
Quite a character.
So he doesn't speak English. He speaks Yiddish. It's basically like English meets Yiddish. It's this kind of weird thing, because you know how lots of Hasidic Jews come from Stamford Hill, which is very near Hackney. So by rights, they should all be all right, mate. How are you, mate? But instead, they all speak, hello, how are you? But I just spent 6 months living in New York, and you go to Williamsburg, you think they'll talk with a Brooklyn accent, go, hey, how you doing? And they don't go, hello, how are you? It's a worldwide thing. So I went to go and see him. Right? He lives around the corner, and I've been going to synagogue for about 6 months. And I went to see him one day, and he goes, Mr. Blaker, come in. And he goes, Mr. Blaker, what is your name? And I went, actually, now what is your name? So I said, you know what is your name? I said, I thought we're going to people, right? He goes, now what's your real name? That's just Ashley Blake. That's just what's on your passport. That's your nickname. What's your real name? And I said to him, Ibrahim Muhammad. He didn't find it. because he wanted my Hebrew. Do you have an English? You're not like Ian Yusuf.
No. We chose a hard route. We stuck with it. So my full name, I think, like my birth school, was like Imran Yusuf, like Kanye or something like that. But we could probably never get that on the poster.
Yeah, my name would be crowded out. No, because my Hebrew name is Hanan ben Moshe Halevi, which means I'm in the tribe of Levites. We made your kings.
Oh.
Okay.
Great.
So
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you, Lena. Well, I saw a lot of laughter there, Imran, and I heard some of the jokes came across. But tell us a little bit about the show, because it's a fascinating show, and I was fortunate enough to actually see it live. And also, something that's intrigued me, and we will have time for questions from the audience, but are there areas you really don't cross? You know, are there themes that you think, no, I can't go there, or my partner can't go there? But start off, how did the show come about? And then please answer the second one. And of course, unmute. You're only doing that as a joke, aren't you?
There we go. Sorry, I thought I was waiting for someone to do that. But hello, it's a huge to be part of this. So how did it come about? It's about when Ashley and I had together each other for like a while, but just almost in passing. And then in 2018, Ashley and I were both at the Edinburgh Festival at the same time, completely separate related show. Well, doing a show about an Orthodox in his journey into it. I'm doing a show called Saint Sufi, and it was my next hour, and about how I'd grown as I entered my age. And I went to watch his show, and he couldn't come and see my conflicts, unfortunately. No war, nothing like that. It was just time conflicts. And after what we did is that we up and chat, and he's like, hey, what about this called profit sharing, and share a stage? I do a bit, then we come on together and we do a little Q&A. And I said, yeah, it was totally his idea. And what that footage you just there at JW3, a Jewish cultural centre in North London, and we did 3 sold nights there to predominantly Jewish audiences, you can imagine, and great, like it was just great. So that's how it came about. And for your second question was crossing lines, right? And in terms of crossing lines on the show, I think we had an idea. We wanted to make the show relatively family friendly, so therefore would characterize the kind of content we'd do and how we would go. Like we would both be aware that this is the kind of stuff that I don't appreciate being said about faith, and so therefore I don't appreciate someone saying for me to do for me to be like. So we found a middle ground. But personally, I'm just performing comedy clubs and doing my own solo shows. I think about what am I to achieve by what I'm saying is what I'm going to say. I'm going to try provoke thoughts that I want to provoke, and also invite to have the kind of conversation that can be about the world. Is it to bring people to the table, right, we can solve this, rather than go up and feel angry and ashamed and plot if you want. So, that always is at the forefront of my mind when I think about what I'm really seeking to achieve by saying it.
Okay, thank you, Imran. The connection's not great there, but I think we got the gist of it. Andrew, and you got to
picking up on what Imran just said about are there areas that you wouldn't go to? I would defend stoutly my right to offend people. I do it all the time. I do it, before I've got out of bed in the morning. But I have a right to do that. But why would I want to do that? Why would I choose to do that? I have a choice not to offend people as well. If I don't want to do that. So there's choices to be made.
Lena. Yeah, you need to unmute as well.
I'm sorry. No, I have a question that keeps kind of coming up and again in my work, is to who makes the joke? And if, for example, so this kind of like in-group, out-group, that is it okay and is it less offensive for me to say something about my own tribe, my own group? And could the same thing being said by somebody who's out of the group become more offensive because he or she's the outsider? And how does that play into offense? I don't know if anybody has.
Thank you, Lena. Imran, could you have a go at that one? Because one of the things I noticed in your show, and then perhaps Phil can comment, is that actually the jokes that you told were very self-deprecating. Yeah. I don't think you and Ashley told jokes about each other's communities. I can't remember.
Well, a little bit about the virgins in the beginning, the first clip where, but it wasn't that much.
But Imran, would you comment on that?
Yeah, well, so you only saw a clip there. In that show, when I just did it, I talked about my entire journey of identifying with my faith, learning a bit from my family, from my community, how observant or non-observant I've been through my life as a kid, as a teenager, as a young man, you know, and now in my 40s. So I went through trial and error as well. You know, often I may have stuff that has upset people, and I've been committed about it. And if I feel that I stick to what I say, then I do so. But there's been a couple of occasions where I'm like, you know what, I could tweak this to make my better, and to have even those who agree with me to understand for them not to. I wouldn't want to walk away and feel that I'm their enemy, and that's something very important to me. Because we need bridge builders. You can still do that and be critical. You can do it in a way where the person you need to be critical about doesn't basically, like I said, walk away and plot revenge or what they're going to see and build up anger toward and hatred towards you, because we need a lot of that in the world. So you know, you learn through trial and error, and ultimately, you know, what you're going to leave behind in the world. You know, if I was to drop dead right now, could I look back, you know, and go, you know what, I did my best, and I think I might have left something worthwhile behind that's going to help both communities continue to work together.
There are lots of things that I think of that are funny that I choose not to say because I don't have to. Because I think they might be offensive, because comedy happens or humor happens in a relationship. And why would I want to damage that relationship, either relationship with the audience or with the Twitter followers or whatever? I have a right to say those things, but why would I?
Mm.
Andrew, do you feel as a Christian that you're in a slightly different position in terms of the power dynamics? Here we have a Jewish, Christian, Muslim collection. Is there a different role that you have? And then after Andrew, Phil, I'd like you to come in, because I heard the term bridge building that Imran's talking about. But where are the points when you're not building bridges, you're almost destroying them to make a point? But Andrew, first comment as a Christian. Is there a Christian dimension to this?
Well, I think there probably is, because culturally Christians have been the dominant party, and we've got a lot of bad stuff to live down, and so that invites a lot of humility, I think, from the Christian community. On the other hand, we are more ridiculous than the other communities. I mean, look at the stuff that our people wear. It's absolutely comical. And also, we're in a position where Christian faith in the UK at least is declining, at least in terms of audience numbers, whereas other faiths, Muslim faith is growing a bit in the UK. So we have to be a little bit careful about that. But Christians need to learn to take it. And Christians are like bananas. We bruise far too easily, and we need to get over ourselves a little bit. But we also need to be conscious that we have a lot of past to live down, and so that calls for a bit of humility in our relationships with other faiths.
Come in, Phil.
Yeah, sorry. I just listening to that. I suppose I'm quite interested in picking up on the kind of the bridge building reference you made, Ed. But I think bridge building is not only between different faiths. I suppose that our identities are more complex than that, and I think humour can also play a role in, for example, I'm just wondering about the kind of intergenerational aspects of our communities and how humour can actually connect with culture in a way that gives people a kind of identity that they might want to express that's slightly different to perhaps their religious identity. So, and I think particularly maybe that's important for the younger generation. So it's like rounding off your identity and making sure, or working on communicating your identity in a broader sense than perhaps how you're kind of identified by your religious faith. So that interests me. And also the other aspect, and I'm just wondering, is this kind of religious secular bridge, and whether actually it's important for those of faith to express humor as a way of connecting with perhaps our more secular society, and showing that people of faith are actually grounded in a lot of the kind of, as I said before, absurdities and realities of life that everybody is, and it creates that sense of commonality. So I think those are important in our work. I would also make maybe just if I may a point on this kind of, you were talking, Andrew, well, yeah, it's about what goes and what is too far, and whether it's okay to cause offence and so on. I suppose that made me think of the role of humour perhaps in terms of testing people out. And I think sometimes in my work in peace building and conflict resolution, if you're bringing people together who perhaps have deep-seated kind of enmity, then there is a degree of testing each other out. And I think sometimes humour is used as a tool to do that. And also, I think it builds resilience. I think humour and how you saying, actually, Christians have got to learn to take it. I think the way in which we communicate with each other and we use humour is a way of building that resilience we need for kind of robust engagement.
I mean, I'd want to point out that Jesus was deeply offensive sometimes in the humour that he used. There's good precedent for it, but he also had a sense of the ridiculous. There's this incredibly sacred moment at the Last Supper when Jesus, we're told, goes and washes his disciples' feet as this fantastic act of humility before them. If you've ever had your feet washed, it really tickles. That was a moment of kind of high drama and high kind of spiritual value, but they must have been falling about, trying to stop themselves from giggling. So the humour is not only in looking at ourselves and what we've created, it's deep in the heart of what we believe as well. The ridiculous is at the heart of being religious.
And in fact, you're quite right, Andrew. The very traditional way of teaching, a Jewish way of teaching, is by telling jokes anyway and having some kind of message and moral behind it. So it's a very Jewish thing to do as well. Imran, this thing about resilience and a thick skin, if anybody needs a thick skin, it's a comedian, isn't it? And particularly a comedian who's going to use religion. How thick is your skin? Does it ever get pierced?
I think when I started out in comedy, and I was, it was a whole new world for me, and I saw how crass and blunt the jokes and and also the backstage kind of banter was as well. And I've had to learn to be become resilient. But I think maybe I've had an added advantage, is that when you are and I hate this, the term an ethnic minority in a country such as Britain, we've learned that, look, we've got to work 10 times harder just to even get anywhere near being equal. You've got to be tough. If somebody says something, you've got to turn the other cheek the best you can. So I already brought that into the comedy space. And what I did is that if I felt hurt or upset, I would listen carefully. I would listen to behind the words. And I'll give you an example without mentioning name. If I heard a comedian say something critical about Islam or particularly about the Prophet Muhammad, I'd look at them and realize, well, the comedian who's doing that particularly is gay, right? And their community deal with a lot of prejudice that also comes out of the Muslim community as well. And so he's saying what he's saying deliberately to destroy me and have me go home. He's his own pain. He feels dehumanized by the homophobic religious rhetoric that is available on all platforms. So I would listen to that, and he's in pain. Instead of me getting angry and telling him he's offended me, I should listen to him and let him know at the very least that I'm not his enemy. That I've learned to see the world as it is as it is, and not just through the lens of ancient texts that take us back to a time when people saw the world in a very fixed way. It's changed. It continues to grow and evolve. So to further point out, I think there's an important scene in The Matrix that you should watch, because I'm sure there's a lot of religious allegory in that film. And in the moment when Neo comes back to life and stops the bullets in midair, right? That what we can learn from that is that he realizes the bullets, the insults are not real. They may be coming out of these guns of his enemies, but he knows that everything's being said. He can choose not to believe in it. He can choose that those bullets have no value to hurt him, and he stops them. So there's a great metaphor, great allegory in that from The Matrix. And that's something on board, that anyone says anything to me to insult me, my community, or my family, I can not react. It's a skill that you can develop, and by doing comedy, I learned to do kind of slowly, and ultimately watching The Matrix and it out.
Well, thank you, Imran. I think you're as much a teacher as you are a comedian, so if things get difficult, come to my neck of the woods. I'm pleased that we've got some questions coming in, and I do urge people to continue to send them through. And this is one, I think it's probably Andrew, but Phil might want to comment as well. Andrew said there are things he could say that would be offensive, but he doesn't. But there are other people who do say them. Why do they, and what are the outcomes of such forms of humour? Andrew.
Well, in a way, Imran has just been talking about that some humour comes out of pain. There's a fantastic play by Trevor Griffiths called Comedians that was written in the late 1970s. It's about a school for comedians, and there's a line in which one of the comics turns to the other and says, "That's a joke that hates. That's a joke that hates. I don't want to tell jokes that hate." And yeah, that's a choice. We can see jokes that hate, and sometimes you have to catch yourself, because a joke that hates can be funny. It's just maybe not one that you want to join in. So I'm perfectly prepared to say, yeah, I can see that structurally that joke works very well, but that's a joke that hates. And so it's not for me. Okay.
Phil, this one might be for you, actually, about building interreligious communities, because I know that's a subject close to your heart. From Laura, I'm wondering about building interreligious community through humour without talking so specifically about religious beliefs and cultures. Can just being together and laughing be enough? Or does building interreligious community require being more explicit about our intentions and our faiths in our humour?
Good question. Good question. I think, yeah, I mean, building relations and obviously is something that takes time. It's something that you have to keep working on, as we all know. I suppose I see humour as part of that. I personally, I would be very surprised, particularly knowing the team I work with at FBF, if our kind of events were humourless. there is humor there. It's expressed in different ways, but it's certainly there. Do you have to be specific about? I suppose what I would hope is that there is some opportunity, whether it's through humor or through other means, to actually talk about the things that you disagree on. So I think in that sense, I wouldn't want humor. I would see humor not as a mask in that sense, to mask issues, but rather, as I think I said at the beginning, as a way of shining a light maybe and opening up those conversations. But it's interesting to listen to Imran and Andrew, but about being sensitive as a comedian as well, or being sensitive to think about what's behind the humor. And I think that's really important in our work, is that we kind of think a bit deeper than, try to think behind the words and behind the humor, as well as just listening to what's being said. So I don't know if that answers the question, but I think humor is a way of kind of, breaking the ice, shining a light on issues, but I think it needs to lead to some kind of discussion of what are those things that we find problematic.
Lena, I'd like to ask you, you're very silent there, which is not a good
thing. I was going to actually continue on Phil's point, that at least from studies I've written, and including some of the Woolf Institute, sometimes interfaith dialogue is sort of like a kumbaya thing, like, okay, let's talk about all the similarities and we're all the same, and that's great. But I think it's much more challenging to actually talk constructively about differences. How are we different? We can respect that we're different, but we have to acknowledge that we're different. And that's where I'm really interested. How do you bring humor to discuss these differences and to potentially diffuse any tension that might come up with these conversations? So I'm kind of continuing Phil's point, and also about pointing. What you said, shining the light. I mean, I don't have an answer, but to me that's the key, because yeah, you can talk and say, oh, we're all funny and we're all a nice big family, but at the end of the day, you have to talk about the differences, and that's where maybe humor can come in if it's done correctly. Lack of a better term, respectfully, inclusively. And that's where you need, I think, a good, comedian or a good somebody who can have the sensitivity to.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because it made me wonder about the difference between the kind of informal, kind of interreligious, interfaith kind of encounters you might have, and the sort of more formal stand-up routines. Yeah. And I'm just wondering if Imran thinks that by being a stand-up comedian, you've also almost got in that role. I'm just wondering whether you think you have license to kind of do that shining a light and kind of exposing some of the absurdities of life and of belief and all the rest of it in a way that maybe is more difficult if we're just in a group of people together. Because it's very different context, isn't it? An informal encounter, and then going to a stand-up routine.
Yeah. I think when I wanted to be a stand-up comedian was before 9/11. So before, Muslims be characterized globally as this issue, the way they've been characterized all the way until today. But it has kind of taken, so we've had a bit of a break for a while, right? Before all of it kicked off, I just wanted to be funny, or jokes and have fun. And then 9/11 happened. And so I had to talk about my identity, my background in an increasingly more politicized way. And it's, you've got to deal with you've got to hand that deals you. And that's what I've had to realize, that when I'm up there, whether I like it or not, community, I only have so much leverage in terms of as a representative of faith. I'm Indian. I'm an Arab Muslim, closer to the religion that's come out of their culture. Whereas we are, I guess, I hate to use the phrase, but like a franchisee almost. Even though it's been, we've been Muslim generations, not Arabs. It's something we've had to learn about. So, it does make me realize, wow, I'm playing an important. Well, if I want, I've got an important role here. I'm going to take it. What is the discourse? What is the communication between Muslims and Jews and Christians at the moment? And do I know what can I bring that might help make things better? And the reason I'm so interested in that is that I grew up in this country. I wasn't born here, but I grew up in Britain, and it's mostly great to me, particularly primary school, where I felt I was part of something. I was part of school. I was like a family. I was part of the country. Later, as we grow up, suddenly things get into your head, and suddenly you feel a little bit more divided over things, and especially over things like identity. But I realized, who am I choosing to be right now? And through comedy, I say something that's going to make the world a better place, because I got an upbringing in this country because of sacrifice and the efforts people before me made, and I feel that the right thing to do is to be part of that, so that next generation of kids can have even better than I did.
Thank you, Imran. There's a question that's come up, which I'm going to ask of Andrew, our resident academic, and maybe even Lena. And Phil, to give you a heads up, I just want to tease out, Phil, where humour can be used in a conflict situation. Because I'm sure you've been involved, as I have been, in one or two very tense discussions. And actually, I wonder if you can give us an example where the joke, if you like, pricked that tension. But first of all, Imran's fallen off. That seems appropriate for a humour webinar. Andrew, I don't know if you can see this question, but I'm going to read it out to you from Silka. And this is distinguishing between humour and laughter. Quite intriguing, actually.
He's here, Imran. I see.
You're back. Good.
Yeah, he's
here.
So,
Andrew, due to my own research, and I'm quoting now, I wonder how you distinguish between laughter and humour. I found there's a significant amount of laughter in interfaith interaction without necessarily much humour, or without direct humour or jokes, because it's situational or specific. I think it's quite intriguing, Andrew, the difference between laughter and humour.
Yes, somebody would be able to. I think Silka probably ought to be talking to us about about that. She probably knows best. It seems to me that that laughter occurs where there is a shared vulnerability, where we recognise that we're in the same boat, and we may have to get further and further down to the lowest common denominator of our humanity, until we find that that point. I don't know. That's a really interesting question about whether humour is. I mean, laughter is humour deferred to a point where the dam bursts or the balloon pops. I think, a comedian, a stand-up comedian, stands on stage and tells a story, and as that story progresses, the audience is thinking, yeah, I get that, I understand that, oh no, he's in a dilemma, it's getting worse, what on earth's going to happen? There's that kind of jeopardy, but we're in that together, we share that, and we share it with the comedian. Oh no, what she said now, it's got even worse now, this is going to end in disaster. And then suddenly, with what we sometimes call the punchline or the end line, it's resolved, and it's resolved in a way that we all share as well. And I think the reason that's funny is because that's what life is like for all of us. We're in this kind of interim, liminal period of the storytelling where we kind of share this thing together. What on earth is this all about? And all people of all faiths have that sense of, what on earth is this all about? Where's it going to end? Oh no, it's getting worse. How is this possible? But we we share the expectation that the comedian is going to make it right in the end, because there's going to be a resolution that works out. You know, you see the guy walking along the path, and you can see the banana skin in front of him, and you know what's going to happen, and you're in that state of shared expectation. You know he's going to step on the banana skin and slip up, and it's going to be terrible. And then just at that moment, he gets to the banana skin, looks down, sees it, takes a step to one side, and you go, oh, fantastic. And he falls in the canal. And that's a kind of common experience that we have in going through life, asking questions about, oh no, where's this going? How's it going to end? Is there some kind of good resolution? And then we don't know. We're just waiting for that. Religion is the nature of religion, is waiting for that kind of resolution that we believe is going to come, and people of faith believe it's going to end well, but we don't quite know. We're in that exciting moment of just about to step on a banana skin, and that's what we have. That's what we share, and humour is finding that together.
Thank you, Andrew. Lena, did you want to comment before Phil comes in?
Yes, about, I mean, that's a very, it's a great question, because it's a very big in humor studies that I've kind of gotten myself involved. There's a big distinction between humor and laughter. I mean, there's laughter is the usual marker of humor, but there's a book by Terry Eagleton called Humour, and he has identified 23 forms of laughter, and not many have to do with humor. There is obviously laughter out of fear, out of nervousness. I go have my blood drawn and I start giggling out of nervousness and fear of the needle. And there's also a concept of unlaughter, which is basically when the audience does not laugh because something's gone or wrong with the joke. But there is definitely very much to be separated. I mean, obviously, laughter is a marker of humor, but it can be a lot bigger than something being funny.
Thank you.
I think broadly speaking, humour is about recognition, and laughter is the resolution of it, I think.
Excellent. A great summation. Phil, can you touch on this point about the conflict, how humour can be used in a really conflicting situation?
Yeah. Yes, I've been thinking about that. I mean, it's a good question, and something that I suppose I've been in situations which, as you say, I'm sure we all have, which are very tense. And I think in those situations, one I'm thinking about particularly, which isn't my situation, but I heard the story of Rolf Mayer and Ramaphosa, the current South African president. But they, during the kind of transition from apartheid to the current post-apartheid society in South Africa, they were negotiating, and somebody had the foresight to tell them to sort of go fishing together. And so they went fishing together, and I don't know which, I think Rolf Mayer, he was casting, it was fly fishing, and he got the fly stuck in the coat of Ramaphosa, and they had to spend a kind of intimate moment kind of trying to get the hook out of the coat. And listening to the story, they laughed, and it was a sort of breakthrough moment. And I think this is more about laughter than humor, but I think what they were laughing at was the absurdity of the situation. Here they were, spokespeople for two sides in conflict with each other, trying to kind of unlock a really complex political situation. And they were trying to disentangle fishing lines together on a lake. And I think the absurdity of it kind of struck home for both of them and created laughter and an intimacy that actually was a breakthrough moment. And I think it's that somehow if you can create those sort of recognition, as you say, Andrew, the recognition of the common condition, the common absurdity. I've used that word quite a lot, I realise, but I think that's what humour and laughter is about. It's a recognition that we all tread on this earth in strange ways, and we have these kind of incidents that are really quite funny and stupid. and I think it was just having that commonality that brought those two people together. And I think that was a key moment in breaking through the negotiations.
Those of us of a certain age will remember the Northern Ireland peace process and the incredible breakthrough when we saw Ian Paisley and Martin McGuinness, who were the icons of opposition, laughing together, and they became known as the Chuckle Brothers. There was something about laughing together that must have come out of recognition of common humanity and common foolishness that allowed that breakthrough.
Imran, the issue of absurdity is something that's key, isn't it, to the role of a stand-up comedian and adapting to a situation. I assume you've had examples where you have it's gone stone cold on stage. What
I said, unlaughter.
Unlaughter, exactly.
Silence.
Not Imran.
And give us some guidance. What do you do there?
Well, it's now like I'm giving comedy work like in faith. I can do dialogue. When it's wrong, sometimes it right. So sometimes it is the audience's fault. Sometimes, very, very rarely, sometimes you might be into a situation where they're not being run badly. There is a particular psychological bias. The room might have 100 people who are out on the work from a particular company and share a particular kind of psychology for that thing. And then you've got to, or there was one at the Comedy Store where of the Cold Guards coming in from Windsor, and they were on a jolly. He had like 60 soldiers, and all the comics like, oh my god, and one of them got up on stage as well, just as the show started. And so it is the audience's fault that you're going to get a weird response. But when it's on you, when it's the comedian, especially around such religious humor, when it was weird is to know if you truly believe in what you're saying, you've just sold on. And there will be sometimes, and this is going back to sometimes it's the audience fault, there are people who come to comedy that aren't comedy savvy. It might sound a bit snobby, but if you're not used to the kind of ebb and flow of what happens in a comedy club, such as the Comedy Store or at Top Secret or something like that, then it might be astonishing. You might be like, oh my God, I can't believe they're saying these kind of things. So, and that goes not just only for religious humor, but ethnic humor and class humor or sexual humor. So when it goes wrong, there's also a perverse enjoyment in it as well. When you know it's going wrong and you can't win, is to lean in further and crash that car and make it go on fire.
But yeah, I just wanted to pick up on your point, Imran, about I think you mentioned something not understanding, but I think that another also factor is, I mean, we obviously know that humor is contextual and it's relative, and it depends who says the joke, how, when, kind of all these things make the joke. But there's also something which another humor studies scholar has mentioned, is having the knowledge to kind of decode the joke. I mean, sometimes, sometimes you may not get the joke at all. You may just like, I don't understand it. You may not have the cultural knowledge or to decode it. And that could also lead to basically somebody who's not laughing just because they didn't understand the joke, or, because they're offended, in which case they decided not to scream or yell, but just keep silence.
What about,
that can happen.
Yeah, go for it, Imran. Go for it.
So, so the show you saw, profit sharing, that actually performed together. I wrote a lot of material that was only suitable for that audience. There would be Muslim Jews in a room together. They would have knowledge of the Bible, Quran, and enough of that, the prophets, to understand the stuff that I show that I might be able to do in a mainstream comedy club. And I guess then the leader was a bit more inside the likes of JW3, because Muslims who were there were like, we really get this is for us. But yeah, you have to be very wary of, like, am I in too deep a mainstream audience, and am I not going deep enough for a religious audience?
So we're drawing not yet to a close, but we're sort of moving into the last part of this webinar, and I do want to touch on the question of the post-COVID world. And you talk about we talk about the absurdity, we talk about the audience getting it wrong or having to soldier on, but of course we're all sitting in front of our machines on our own, and I know occasionally delivering talks or delivering sermons, you try and bring in the odd joke, and it's not easy, is it, when you're looking at a blank screen, possibly only yourself telling a joke, which you might think is funny, but you know your children certainly don't. How does that affect the question of humour? The fact that you can't gauge the temperature of the room in a way that Imran might be able to do in the stand-up comedy store or somewhere like that. Who would like to take that? Oh, go on, somebody. Imran. No, I can't hear you, Imran.
Sorry, there we go. Sorry, I accidentally mute my microphone. So I've done a very few Zoom gigs since, you know, we've been in this pandemic, and it is difficult. Like, if you don't know who's in the audience and you don't have the ability to hear them, it affects, I guess, you know, really understanding whether it's working or not. Fortunately, some gigs have had some kind of feedback mechanism, like even on Zoom, and it will give you, oh, right, okay, that kind of worked. But when you don't have that, I think you really have to focus on the writing. Like, what am I saying? And I think, you know, if you're some comedian, well, I think comedian writers, but some more than others in terms of really hammering down, cutting deadwood, right, you know, having pure muscle and joke. And it kind of perfects your writing to go, I know this is structurally, and so, yeah, I guess that's the kind of impact it's had. I managed to write a little bit of new material. Fortunately, I managed to make work a Zoom gig at once, but I'm never going to really know when I get back on stage, which will be very, very soon.
Phil, what about your work? Phil, over to you. Yeah.
Yeah, it must be really, really hard. I can imagine Imran, you know, doing Zoom gigs for stand-up. I mean, I remember Omid Jalili. We had him for a sort of an event which was face-to-face pre-COVID, and then we brought him back to do an event which was online just last year, and he did a brilliant job. And in fact, he picked me out, brought me into one of his jokes about baldness, and so I was, yeah, how dare he? But I now know that I've been the butt of the jokes of a world-renowned comedian, so that's all right. But it was it was very difficult, I think, to sort of break the ice and to have that kind of rapport, I think, online. And certainly I think in our events that we have, our dialogue events online, they are difficult. I'll say one thing though, and this doesn't really directly relate to humor, but I think for some people, and I suppose this comes back to, Imran, the kind of memories I have of being in a comedy club and being, oh, please don't pick me out. You know, this kind of fear you have that the comedian is someone going to pick you out and ridicule
you. Sit in the back.
Yeah, that's right. And you're hiding, and of course they spot you. The one person who they have to bring out. But that makes me kind of reflect on how for some of those who come to online events, actually they feel safer because there's something about going into a room where you have that physical presence with people that you don't know that is quite threatening. So in some ways for people, it's a sort of more a bit of a safer space. And I suppose if the comedian picked me out, I can just kind of switch off my screen.
Two things about that. One is I take deep offence at jokes about baldness. I'm not bald. I'm just differently hairy.
Hence your hat. Hence you're wearing your hat.
The second thing is I think there's a commonality between comedy and interfaith work, which is shown up by this kind of strange way of relating that we've got here, and that is that the comedian chooses to make themselves vulnerable, chooses to take the risk. You walk onto a stage offering to entertain people, you're taking a huge risk, and you're carrying that risk yourself. You're saying, I will take the risk of being able to unite this audience, being able to find one thing that I can say that will make everybody laugh, one thing that they have in common. And that happens in interfaith work as well, that some individual or individuals have to make themselves vulnerable, take the risk of saying, I am going to try and find something here that will tickle this person with this set of beliefs, and this person with this set of beliefs, and this person with this set of beliefs. And there's a real risk in that. There's of course there's a risk of rejection, or a risk that it won't work, as there is every time a comedian opens their mouth, or a preacher opens their mouth either. But hey, if you want to make some progress, if you want to bring people together, if you want people to laugh, you have to be the one to go out there and take that risk. It takes a kind of level of self-confidence that bordering on arrogance, but also an ability to get knocked down and then get up again. And that's true for comedy, and it's true for interfaith dialogue, I think.
Very nice way to round it off. I was going to ask whether computers have a sense of humor.
AI humor.
Yeah. Lena?
I don't know. I think they may develop one. I was actually reading an article in the FT Weekend section last weekend about how AI handles doubt, that actual doubt and the ability to know what you don't know is one of the things that differentiates us from a robot, because they don't know what they don't know. And I was actually trying to think how that relates to humor, and whether the nuance and the ambiguity of humor is still not, I mean, the technology or AI is not advanced enough, if I could say, to kind of be able to have robots understand humor and kind of pick up the nuances. I don't know, but I thought it was an interesting parallel.
I know for sure that robots can't write jokes because they don't have that shared humanity, and that's why you can't tickle a robot. You can't make a robot laugh by tickling it, because they haven't got that common humanity. Humor, comedy is the most human of all the disciplines, the most fallible, the most vulnerable.
But you could argue, I'm actually just thinking that now, you know, the whole thing about knowledge and humor, that they do have the knowledge, therefore they could theoretically do a joke, but I guess that's not the case yet. I mean, one of the clips I was going to show, the comedian talks about kind of religious knowledge and not making jokes about topics that, and especially with the religious topics that he's not familiar with, and how he only jokes about things that he knows. So, you know, for what it's worth.
Well, I'm going to draw it to a close. I would really like to thank the four panelists, Lena, Andrew, Imran, and Phil, I put you last, Phil, only because that's where you are on my screen. I wouldn't want you to take any offence. There's nothing against bald-headed people. But to thank you all for engaging in the way that you have, and to thank everybody who participated for the questions. We are recording, so this will be available. And I think we'll also put up details of the various publications and the work and the we don't do CDs anymore, do we, Imran? But links into programs and comedy sketches that are available. Our next webinar is on the 13th of May, and it's a very unlaughter title, if I can use that term. There's religion by numbers, but important nevertheless to see the different trends and the aspects of religion and belief, both how we measure them, how we rely or shouldn't rely on those numbers. And that will be with David Voas and chaired by our own Julian Hargreaves. So thank you again, everybody. Thank you in particular, Lena, for bringing us all together.
Yes, thank you.
And would you like to have the last word, Lena?
No, I was going to say there must be a lot of numbers involved because there are 3 sessions to the webinar. So that's my kind of.
Well, it's the holy trinity of religion by numbers.
Exactly.
Thank you, everybody.
Well, thank you very much. I really
Thanks very much.
Nice to be part of it. Thank you, Ed.
Thanks
for your time.
Bye, Andrew, Imran.